prepare for some Western lovin' by first learning the rules of courtship. A cool thing to note is that women had a lot more rights without needing a man in the Western frontier. You could own a business or land, or be a bounty hunter or a sharpshooter, or just as easily be a brothel keeper or a grocer. Ladies had range. But there was still a ratio of like 90 to 10 men to women on the frontier, so the population had to happen somehow. Courtship required intent to avoid scandal. Young men, no matter how honorable a dandy or lowly a cowboy, must ask a young lady's male guardian for permission to court her. Courting held an inherent promise that said, we are spending time together to see if we desire marriage. To be courting doesn't mean you're engaged, but it did signal to all others that the lady was spoken for. Essentially, it was dating. Not this modern version that's been butchered by the last few generations, but rather what we saw in TV classics like Seinfeld, where it was casual and comfortable, no determination on length, just seeing how you two fit together. Courting included meals with the woman's family, taking her on a sleigh or carriage ride. Parlor games, reading aloud, and picnics were very popular, and courting actually made ice cream dates a thing. The Atkinson Daily Patriot printed the following ad on May 16th of 1881. It will also be in order to treat your girl to ice cream as often as once a month. Girls often exchanged things such as a locket, a coin, or even a bullet shell as a gift. If a couple was financially strapped, exchanging locks of hair was a memento as well. Oh, and also coffee. Cowboys sometimes hoarded coffee to impress women. You've learned the rules of courtship, now it's time to claim your lady by sparking and walking out. And no, that's not light a cigarette and leave the room. Sparking and walking out were acts of courting that signified deeper involvement. This is when we started getting to the relationship or engaged parameters. Sparking means to engage in courtship, but it was also a nickname for kissing in PDA, which the American West was considerably less prudish about than the East and South Victorians, seeing no scandal and a little touchy lovin'. This is particularly due to the scarce supply for women as aforementioned. Walking out together is a little more like in the East and the South. Young ladies had a reputation to protect, and parents will be parents, regardless of the time. Going on a walk or walking out meant that courting people could be in the public eye, and therefore they could ditch a chaperone. Anywhere else this would have been a huge scandal, but on the frontier, non-married couples would walk out in public to signify their claim and show mutual respect for it. Now anyone would know if someone was an unloyal partner, and bonus, it's before you tie the knot. For a man to take his lady to an event, it could involve a lot of work. Ride into town, reserve a carriage, retrace the mileage back with the rig to collect the lady, then go back once more. That's a lot of time, labor, and dedication, and it's a true testament to the love many couples shared. Walking out remained a popular day even for the married. Gonna get down and dirty? Then let's talk to it. Fun slang is up next. You and your lady done did your courting and are getting hitched. Time to impress her with some manly and sexy terminology. Cowboys had a way with words, so it's not too surprising that they used some pretty colorful terms to describe matters of the heart, and that included courting. Getting hitched was a serious business, and spooning or sparking no less. The vernacular was different back then, and lots of phrases and terms used that were common enough that even if they sound gibberish to us, they were full of comprehensive sentences then. A bunch of these are actually still used casually today. From a list of dirty Wild West slang, here's a few recognizable terms. Screwin', foolin' around, painted lady, and knockin' boots. To get the wrong pig by the tail is dying out a little bit more now, but essentially means picking the wrong person for something. Meanwhile, some more creative and lesser heard slang terms are perooting, which means intercourse. Spooning, unlike now, actually meant intercourse, not cuddling. And a California woman was a term for a separated but not yet divorced woman. Get the mitten was a playful way to tease your homie about getting rejected. For people with dirty mouths, they refused to get their mouths dirty. What do I mean? While some factors of the Wild West were a free-for-all, one thing agreed upon across the board of the Wild West was that oral pleasure was just a little too exotic. This finding is documented by Chad Heap's novel Slumming: Sexual and Racial Encounters in American Nightlife, 1885 to 1940, and states that the euphemism in cowboy slang for the act was the word French. It's not as if it wasn't anywhere else in the world or just had recently become a thing. The act had existed in many regions and goes far back into the BCs. It just seems that people in the Wild West felt it was a little too European for their liking. In fact, oral was so sparse that even the painted ladies were against it, shunning other workers who performed it and refusing to associate or even eat with them. Well, it's time to get freaky deaky, so let's talk contraceptives. Because it wasn't going in here or back there in the Wild West days, so ladies had an issue on their hands if they wanted to avoid a pregnancy but still wanted a literal romp in the hay. Especially since condoms did exist, but they were super expensive, so people had to find out prevention methods. Pregnancy and childbirth were incredibly dangerous at the time, and with so few women, it became a dangerous game to even get pregnant. In fact, men and women on the frontier passed during childbirth. Women were often left with the choice of life-ending pregnancies or noxious substances to prevent or diminish a pregnancy. These substances were also deadly and contained toxic ingredients, often from plant sources, that would end unwanted or simply prevent egg fertility. The long-term side effects for many women, especially those who worked in brothels and ingested these substances more frequently, would become infertile completely. Ovarian cysts were also a side effect, as well as hemorrhage or organ failure from overexposure to these poisons. It's sad, but in the Wild West, many women had to decide whether to have a baby or the high risk of possibly dying giving birth. Contraceptives, unspoken rules of oral, it seems like they could be hard to learn your birds and bees. So next up, the only way to learn was to learn by trying. That's right, the classic toss them in the deep end and watch them drown approach. Sure, you could get a vague idea as to what intercourse entails from living in towns that had literal brothels or semi-public intercourse, which we'll get to in a little bit, but it was mostly word of mouth or unhelpful packets called marriage manuals. These late 1800s safe sex brochures were laughably inaccurate and stressed the importance of only engaging in the activity during marriage. If you wanted to know anything beyond that, you'd have to learn by doing it yourself. As you've heard, it was pretty chill back then, so when it came down to some PDA and some romping, the whole abstinence pitch was about as useful as their killer contraceptives. There was no proper education on intimacy, which means not only did people not know enough about their parts, but they also had no knowledge of diseases that could come with them. These manuals also highlighted how self-given pleasure was unhealthy because of the use of human, for anything other than procreation was frowned upon in the eyes of the Lord. This lack of education led to the use of their wily contraceptives and also the use of the next item on our list. Bundling. It's more than just getting cozy. An early custom of the Wild West, a courting couple who wanted to sleep beside one another but had yet to be married but still wanted to withhold from, well, carnal desire, they could bundle. It's exactly how it sounds. The courting people would literally burrito themselves in separate blankets or into a large fabric sack that tied around the neck, and it would allow them to sleep sinlessly next to each other or even cuddle. Now, I know what you're thinking, Teresa, that little bit of material isn't gonna stop no tomfoolery, especially once cuddles get into the mix. Rest assured, I got you, because for those who really were tempted, you could also have a bundling board come into play to literally draw the line. It's a physical divider placed down the center of the bed to keep unmarried partners from touching completely. No sleeping sack to sleeping sack action with a 2x4 blocking the way. It allowed the two to talk all night and even see each other's faces. Sometimes you could cuddle kinda over it, but no intercourse was capable. Both bundling options let couples experience physical intimacy before their wedding, and it was great for when you visited your lady and she still lived at home in a shared bedroom. You see where romp in the sack comes from now though? So how about after those I do's? It's out in the open. As forementioned, I would return to the topic of semi-public adult acts, and here we are. What a fun place to be. You know what isn't fun? In the Wild West, most families lived in small houses, usually made up of one large room. So naturally, when it came down to it, every member of a family sharing space, privacy wasn't very possible. Yeah, this isn't the fun and flirty voyeur stuff we were talking about. This is more in like grandma's range of vision. In this case, it's fair to question how they would get intimate when sleeping in a bed with other relatives. Having more space meant having more money, a type of privacy afforded by class. Money meant privacy, and in the Wild West, there wasn't much money, meaning shared rooms or houses and finding strategic ways to get off in privacy. Author Brian Watson explained how the American West and North America as a whole went from a mindset of comfort to one of more sheltered as it is now. He cites that during Reformation, figures such as Martin Luther King created a sanctity of privacy surrounding intimacy, something previously non-existent. What's scandalous to us now was more normal to them than how we choose to live. Here's a weird one I didn't expect to learn about in research. Mail order brides. The Wild West had mail order brides. Yeah, not something I would have guessed, but it makes sense. Female populace was next to none, and sure, with more men around than you can choose from, some were fortunate enough to marry good men and live happy ever after. But still, some other women found themselves in desperate situations that robbed them of their youth and sometimes of their lives. So mail order actually benefited both the lonely prospectors and cowboys, but also the romance-seeking belle. One way for men living on the frontier to meet women was through subscriptions to Heart and Hand clubs, newspapers with information and photographs of women with whom they could correspond. Eventually, a man might convince a woman to join him in the West, in matrimony, or a woman convinces the man. Social status, political connections, money, companionship, or security were often considered more than love in these arrangements. But some used these to genuinely connect and enjoyed a lengthy correspondence courtship. Some knew each other well and had courted prior to a separation, or were connected by their respective families in different cities. We all have that auntie telling us she knows someone she likes for us. Although some matches ended in significant disaster, others yielded lasting contentment and happiness. In brief, amazing women left hearth and home and traveled great distances to marry a man, and if they were lucky, it'd be one they'd fallen in love with through letters. And last but not least, homosexuality was no scandal at all. In fact, it was widely accepted, normalized, and not even questioned. Y'all think Brokeback Mountain came out of nowhere? Even though Victorians didn't write about it, homosexuality was very, very common then as it is today. But because the Victorians avoided the topic, Hollywood followed suit with depictions of the rugged cowboy and roguish Western life that was simplified and manly. This modern erasure of homosexuality, as well as the racial whitewashing of the cowboy image, has long since been disproven by modern research. Archival photographs, memoirs, diaries, and more open attitudes have uncovered the shocking underworld of the West. Wild West society didn't necessarily label people as homosexual or heterosexual, but rather allowed each person to be who they needed to be in any given moment. With women especially not as present in large communities such as a mining camp, some men would fill the role of a woman for physical pleasure and domesticality, and normal gender roles were challenged. This was recorded in Alfred Kinsley's 1948 study, Sexual Behavior in Human Male. This same study reported the highest frequencies of homosexual intimacy to be among men in the rural farming communities, and that cowboys and miners even often coupled up in unions known as a bachelor marriage. Part of this comfortable acceptance comes from the exposure to the neighboring indigenous communities, where we've always acknowledged two-spirit, an indigenous exclusive multi-gender identity, or simply beyond the grasp of sexuality and gender labels. The concept of cross-dressing or same-sex partnership is completely normal. It's crazy to think how LGBT people of the Wild West may be quite scandalized by some of our modern world's present mindset towards them.
Number 10. Bank robberies. Okay, when we hear about the wild, rootin' tootin' Wild West, whatever, we think of outlaws like Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, the James Younger Gang. Apparently, it was just bank robbery central back then. Just a lot of this and tapping and riding horses and stuff. That's really not true. Bank robberies didn't happen that often in real life. In fact, during the Wild West era, officially declared from 1865 to 1900, there were only 8 bank robberies. 8. That many years ago, along 15 western states, there were only 8. To put that in perspective, in 2017 alone, there were roughly 4,000 bank robberies in the United States. Much more than 8. The first armed robbery ever in history was done by the famous outlaw Jesse James and his brother Frank. This went down in 1866. The gang of outlaws robbed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. Fun rootin' tootin' history. Number 9. Camels. My favorite actor growing up, hands down, was Woody from Toy Story. The guy's physical comedy was on point. And no, I don't mean Tom Hanks. I mean Woody, with this crazy little cowboy run, tipping his hat. But what's a cowboy without his horse, right? As soon as Bullseye got introduced in Toy Story 2, the picture was complete. A cowboy and a horse. We've seen this combo at some point in our lives. Everywhere. But did you know that for around 100 years, camels were part of Texas wildlife? So imagine a cowboy on a camel. Yeah, that's real. That happened. Imagine 2 cowboys on the humps of a camel. How silly and intimidating would that look? Back in 1855, Congress spent thousands to purchase and ship feral camels from Egypt. The hot Southwest would make sense when it comes to camels doing their camel thing. But by 1857, the army had 70 camels. Things were going well until, you know, the Civil War happened, and then the camels escaped and all that madness, and then from then on, for 100 years or so, they bred and roamed Texas. Yeehaw, on a camel, have fun. Number 8, cowboys. Alright, since we're talking about cowboys, let's really talk about cowboys. Who were these guys? Was everybody just a cowboy off the bat, or did you have to earn it like a knight? What's the deal here? Well, the guys that we picture in our brain, like Woody, those are cattle herders, and then buffalo, thousands of them, they would roam the land to eat and find water. They would travel miles away, so the herders would follow on horseback and then drive them back to their ranch. They mostly ate beans, dried meat, obviously, and a lot of coffee. Those are the 3 main ingredients of yeeing and hawing. Am I a cowboy? I love beans and coffee. Coffee beans? Oh, don't even get me started. A classic Western outfit was the denim jeans and chaps, the leather covers that, go over your legs. The large rim hats were called Stetsons. Aside from looking cool, they were large enough to keep the sun out of your eyes. That hat would also double down as a drinking bowl for their horse. Sharing is caring. Number 7, the Bison Express. Humans are responsible for the disappearance on many, many wild animals in one way or another. It's usually our fault. Yeah, going back to the Wild Wild West, the year 1869 specifically, that's when the Pacific Railroad was done. It was open to the West to all these explorers, but now they were whipping across these wild lands in record speed, passing hundreds of bison every single trip. Eventually, it didn't take long for these railroads to advertise hunting excursions on these trains. So yeah, guests would climb aboard the top of the train cars and hunt on the top of the trains. Yeah, on the top they would just shoot these animals for sport. Obviously the train couldn't stop and go back for the bodies, so they would just leave them. This one man, Orlando Bond, nicknamed the Brick, okay, he apparently shot thousands himself. He rode the express so many times his rifle caused him to go deaf in one ear. This was done purposely to deprive Native Americans of their food supply. Now our bison's number are incredibly low, something like 2% of what it once was, and humans, well, we're still pretty garbage. What do you know? Number 6, alcohol. These saloons cowboys would visit, was there a bouncer? Did you need 2 pieces of ID? What was the drinking age back then? Well, besides the swinging saloon doors, it really wasn't a fun time at all. Alcohol back then, first of all, was basically just poison. Actually, it was literally poison sometimes. They had whiskey like 40 rods and Tao's lightning. You have a couple of those and you're literally passing out in minutes. Nobody was getting cut off in old-timey saloons. The bartender wasn't like, hey, how about a water, buddy? Let's get you home. No, it was a show. They had this one drink on bar rail called tarantula juice. Yeah, happy 21st birthday. Go throw up. It was made from strychnine, which was actual poison. So when the whiskey wore off, the strychnine would be left over in the patron's body, and it felt like tarantulas were crawling all over your skin. Ugh, yeah, I'm good with a Bud Light Lime. Thanks, man. Number 5, the gold rush. Picture a billboard for the Wild Wild West, okay? What's on it right now? A cowboy tipping his hat in the corner with, 4 missing teeth, a sunset in the corner obviously, maybe a horse, and also a bunch of gold stacked up in a mine, right? Well, we've heard about the Wild West here and there, but was there really a massive gold rush? The California gold rush of 1849, despite what history commonly believes, wasn't the first big gold rush, not even close. The first one was back in 1799. A young man named Conrad Reed found this yellow rock right on his property. He had no idea what it was, and for years, he and his father John Reed used this rock as a doorstopper. You already know where I'm going with this. This 17-pound nugget of gold, which is worth a lot even today, back then this information was game-changing. Congress then built the Charlotte Mint just so they could handle all this incoming gold found in North Carolina right after. Then later in 1828, more gold was discovered, but this time in Georgia. This was the second rush. Then come 1848, James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill, California. After the third one though, that's when the thousands moved out west. That one had the biggest pull. So it's pretty big, but not the first. Number 4, the OK Corral. The shootout at the OK Corral went down on October 26, 1881. It's known as the most famous shootout in history. But should it be? Really? Going back to Tombstone, Arizona, it's 3 p.m. and we have men of the law and of course outlaws all in the same block. So naturally, trouble ensues. There's not enough land here for all of us, some rootin' tootin' shit. There were about 8 men involved in the rumble, but it barely lasted 30 seconds. Also, it's important to note the gunfight at the OK Corral wasn't even at the OK Corral. It happened near the intersection of 3rd Street and Fremont Street, right behind the corral. Yeah, details matter. 3 lawmen were injured and 3 cowboys lost their lives. Yeehaw. That's a sad yeehaw for you guys. This is why you don't organize shootouts at 3 p.m. I don't know, everyone's drunk, there's bad decisions, apparently there's bad aim. Just slam some milk, shake some hands, go home. Simple. Number 3, Helena Duels. So we talked about the bizarre ways folks would settle beef back then. They would slam tarantula juice and shoot animals from the top of locomotives, have a 30-second fist fight in the middle of the day, and then go home. But have you heard of these Helena Duels? It began, of course, in Helena, Texas, aka the toughest town on earth, at least it was back in the 1800s. The Helena Duel began here. There's even a movie called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. They show this style of combat in a pretty brutal Hollywood way. Both opponents had their left hands tied together with buckskin, and then each were given a small knife with an even smaller blade. It had to be short enough so it didn't reach any vital organ. That was the Texas trick. Then they're whirled around until they're dizzy, and then it gets really loud, really messy, and really bloody. Last man standing, pretty much. The crowd, of course, watches and places bets, which is always insane to me. I can't watch UFC sometimes. I don't like seeing things break, let alone a Helena Duel. Catch me inside sipping milk, texting my ex. Hard pass, freaks. Number 2, train games. Entertainment was always a hit or miss when it comes to these historical lists. The Romans held gladiator battles with animals that drew in thousands of spectators from across the land. Well, in 1894, William Crush, a railwayman, had this event in mind that would for sure go down in history. Oh buddy, did it ever. William Crush wanted to secure the future of the railroad company in Missouri, Kansas, and Texas. And to do so, William made an entire temporary city appropriately named the City of Crush. Nice. There was a carnival for children to enjoy and all that jazz, but the main pull for adults was the train smash. The collision of two 40-ton steam trains was meant to be the talk of the town. Look at these Goliaths as they smash, crush, into each other. How fun. Yeah, the trains collided, it worked, and the darndest thing happened. They blew up. Yeah, it's almost like they caused a disaster for popularity. Neat. 40,000 came in and many left injured. A couple of people sadly didn't leave at all. One survivor ended up getting 10 grand out of the deal. His name was J.C. Dean, and they lost their eye in the explosion, so the company gave them a lifetime railway pass. Just the thing you want right after that horrific event. Sorry about your eye, here's free PTSD as well, anytime you want. Enjoy. Crush was later rehired by the railway after it gained popularity. Yeah, this happened back then too. Somebody does something horrible, and then now all of a sudden they're famous. Hashtag chairgirl. And finally, coming in at number 1, Elmer McCurdy. This one is insane, I had to end with it. Elmer McCurdy, back in 1911, he decided to be a rootin' tootin' criminal, and he attempted to rob a train. Unbeknownst to him, that train was not full of gold, but rather passengers. Collecting a whopping $46, which back then was still pretty good, he was quickly shot by a lawman afterwards. This is where things start to get insane. Yeah, I say start. Elmer's body was embalmed and sold by the Undertaker to this traveling carnival. His body was an exhibit almost, with his story attached. And for the next 60 years, his body, this prop rather, was passed around, sold between haunted houses and wax museums. Eventually the guy's body, his real body, don't forget, ends up in California at an amusement park funhouse at Long Beach. Now, come 1976, there's a crew there filming for the $6 Million Man Show, and that's when Elmer's finger breaks off accidentally. Some key grips like whoops, revealing it was an actual mummy. They went to film the $6 Million Man and ended up finding the $46 man in real life. Starting our list off at number 10, a banker. Today, online banking is easy, right? It's a little bit too invasive at times. I don't know. I get an email from my bank, it's like, Mr. McWaters, do you want to provide for your family? I'm like, chill, relax. Back in the Old West, you didn't get a courtesy check-in email. You didn't have overdraft. In fact, the United States national banking system, well, it didn't even exist until 1863. Before then, you'd have what were called wildcat banks. And, well, these were pretty fun. Here we go. What they would do is wildcat banks, they would take deposits for a short amount of time, collect your life savings, and then unannounced randomly, they would disappear overnight. Just take all your money and then run for the woods. How horrible is that? Imagine going to the bank the next day and it's gone. The bank's just not there. You're standing there with a card. Like, hello? Where did I put this in? You're telling me they pretended to be bankers for months at a time? Fake mustache, oh hello sir, good morning. Stamping things that aren't even real. They did all of that and then they just ran away with all of your money. That's wild. I get it now. I get it. The Wild West. After 1863, a noble profession was to work at a bank, and not screw people over for thousands of dollars. The Hudson Bay Company, Wells Fargo, these are all names that began because of these fake Looney Tune wildcat banks. So next time you see your bank call, be thankful. Don't be stressed, be thankful. They've got your back. They're not gonna run away overnight. Number 9, ranch work. Alrighty, I can't do yard work. I don't know if you can tell by my physical being, but I can't lift a brick. My back doesn't allow me to reach the floor. A weird curve in the back, I don't know. Pulling weeds physically hurts my soul. Or maybe I'm just lazy. One of the two, I don't know. Either way, the Old West would have been the end of Taylor McWaters. To be a cowboy, it meant lots and lots of ranch work. It wasn't all yees and haws and kicking around. A lot of the time you were protecting your cattle. That's stressful, right? All that meat just sitting there in the 1800s, good luck. Cowboys earned between $25 to $40 a month. Yeah, which sounds laughable now, but today that would be around $1,500 a month, which is fine. I mean, for a cowboy, I don't know, it's a bit less than. Do cowboys get sick days? Probably not. They probably just get sick. Number 8, railroad work. This is one of the few jobs from the Old West that I actively see every single day coming to work. Living downtown, they're always adding trains and bridges and not finishing any of them. And ideally, you don't want any toxic substance traveling down those lines, right? Fingers crossed. Well, back in the Old West, railroads were meant to assist the booming mining and ranching industries. Thing is, there weren't enough hands. There was not enough to keep up with the rate that they needed to. Like, who's gonna build a railroad? Who was the first person? Railroad workers, monthly, you'd make around $1,000, and this brought a wave of immigrants to the West. The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads, they all lay over 1,700 miles. Now, making this actual railroad, it destroyed the bodies of these workers, but without it, American history would not be the same. Couldn't imagine making a railroad. That is exhausting. Number 7, Blacksmith. Alright, close your eyes and imagine a blacksmith. Just any blacksmith from any time. Is he bald? Does he have a massive beard? Is he incredibly strong and wildly intimidating? Yeah, that checks out. That's what a lot of them look like. Missing teeth, banging something pretty loud, that's a blacksmith. Frontier times were almost a golden time for blacksmiths, believe it or not. Hammers, horseshoes, new railroads, it checks out. No, they didn't need any chainmail, but a saddle wouldn't hurt, that's for sure. We could use a saddle. They would earn up to $200 a day. Blacksmiths were always busy in the Old West. They doubled as auto repair services really at the same time. I mean, I don't know. A guy comes in with a busted up carriage, well, now you're a mechanic. Yeah, go fix this wooden car. Good luck, you have one day. Here's 10 bucks. Number 6, journalism. Believe it or not, the newspaper business cleaned up shop back in the frontier. Everyone wanted to know what the tea was. Tucson, Arizona, for example, back in the day, back in 1831, that one town had 5 different newspapers. Yeah, even though there are only 465 residents, there were 5 different papers. That's stressful. How do you keep up with that much news? I mean, to be fair, before radio and television, yeah, there's probably lots to talk about all day long. That's pretty much all you can do, just talk all day long, so I get it. The industry provided jobs as well. It's very much like YouTube. Here, there's writers, there's hosts, the design and print staff, we have editors. It was a little easier than laying down a railroad, that's for sure. So when it came to jobs, yeah, journalism wasn't that bad. Definitely better than doing anything that has to do with this motion, that's for sure. Number 5, mining. A study done at a mine in Butte, Montana found that miners were dying from tuberculosis. A lot, like 10 times more than they should be. Not should be, but you get what I'm saying. The mining industry is crazy dangerous. Safety was often overlooked and the health of these miners was, well, non-existent at the time. The first gold rush was back in 1799. This kicked off everything. A young man named Conrad Reed, he found this bright yellow rock. He had no idea what it was, and for years, he and his father, John Reed, actually used it as a door stopper. Yeah, this 17-pound nugget of gold just keeping a swift breeze rolling through. It's worth a bit more than a door stopper today, and this actually ended up changing the entire industry. Gold mining got so popular that Congress had to build the Charlotte Mint just so they could handle all this incoming gold found in North Carolina alone. It's pretty cool. You have to make a mint? That's how much money you're making? Buddy, I want a mint. Number 4, law enforcement. Of course, this too was a little different back in the Old West. There are not many body cams back then, I'll tell you that for free. Movies and television, they like to show the Old West as a lawless, rootin' tootin' time, and while sure, some of that is true, it wasn't as terrible as we think. Like A Million Ways to Die in the West, Red Dead Redemption, it wasn't that crazy because before any formal law enforcement agency did pop up, everybody was a bounty hunter, right? Why not? There's nothing else to do. Go lay a bunch of bricks or go catch a bad guy. 50-50, both are quite dangerous. Eventually, positions like that of a US Marshal began to pop up more and more, and well, now there's a bit more order to the system, that's for sure. A bit, just a little bit. Number 3, barkeep. Alright, I love pubs, big old fan of pubs. Never been to a Wild West rootin' tootin' pub, but I'm in no rush. They always have weird drinks like venom snake juice or whatever, like spider ale. I'm like, I don't want any of these poisons. How about a beer? Just a beer, thanks. Bars in the Wild West, not so fun. Not a lot of open mics going on back then in the 1800s. No karaoke night back then. See, back then, these saloons were just for business. That's it. You don't have a mustache and a business plan, get out. In the 1850s, saloons would price their drinks depending on how far away you had to travel. Can you imagine that? In the Yukon, their shot of whiskey was 50 cents a pop. Now, that was a lot back in the day, but if you were to ask for the same drink in a local saloon, say in, I don't know, Colorado, it'd be a lot cheaper. Pretty ruthless. That's rootin' tootin' ruthless. The odd time you would have poker, dice, maybe some guy in a piano with some jazz fingers, sure, but most of the time, business only. When saloons first popped up in Wyoming back in 1822, most of the time, it was only reserved for lawmen, miners, or gamblers. If you don't have any of those 3, you're thirsty. Go gamble. Go grab a dice and come back. Number 2, Resurrectionist. Yeah, you don't see a lot of these guys around anymore, eh? Wonder where they all went. A Resurrectionist is exactly what it sounds like. It's very gross. You're trying to bring someone back to life, I guess. Not really. These guys were responsible for digging up dead bodies, and then they would sell them to medical schools in the West. Now, remind you, this was the late 1820s, so yeah, it was fine, I guess. This practice began in Edinburgh, Scotland. The medical science community was on the up and up, but in order to study new medicines, you know, to avoid the next plague or the next toxin rolling through your system, they needed these guys to come in and do the dirty work. Today, the medical community is a bit different. We're a bit, you know, smarter with things, but hey, never say never. A resurrectionist might come back to life and be a new profession. How ironic. And finally, number 1, medicinal showmen. Yes, we'll end on this note. Step right up and see something that doesn't work. A fake product. Yes, here we go. I'm doing a fake shoe. A fake shoot? A fake show. I don't know. Back in the Wild West, the 1860s to the 1890s specifically, they had what's called medicinal showmen, right? You won't believe your eyes. You have strep throat? Come on up. Here we go. definitely gonna fix that. These guys would go town to town selling elixirs and tonics, whatever, but it was all about the pitch. That's pretty much all they had. They would have pawns, like their buddies, run ahead into town and then plant themselves in the audience before these random medicine shows. That way, when the world's greatest showman doctor arrives, he randomly picks an ill patient that he knew was there, and then boom, just like that, he's cured. Almost like a magic show, right? Some would think, full of lies. One of the most successful of these elixirs was the elixir made by John Healy and Charles Bigelow. It was a mixture of herbs, roots, and animal fat, and it was wildly popular. They toured with this elixir. They had to tell everybody in every town. They said it could treat any illness, but in reality it was just a laxative. Just a mess, just a show, really.
Number 10, Bounty Hunter. Wanted dead or alive. The kind of thing that instills an idea of a character that would go out into the wilderness alone to hunt down criminals like Texas Cheddar over there, and would be despised by all those they encountered. But that's not actually how it really was. You see, bounty hunters as we think of them today weren't really like that in the 1800s. Bounties were usually taken up by public peace officers, private detective agencies, or companies like Wells Fargo & Co. Many sheriffs and marshals, such as myself, Sheriff Stringbean, took up these bounties to make up for the little amounts of money they make from their day jobs. The actual term bounty hunter referred to mercenaries who would join up with an army for the bonus of enlisting. On top of that, the reward for capturing criminals like Texas Cheddar wasn't even called a bounty. It was actually called a bail. Sorry to ruin your day.
Number 9, Gravedigger. What does a monster truck and a weird dude from Kakariko Village have in common? If you said the foundation blocks that made up my childhood, then you win a prize. What's the prize? A big old kiss from me. In all reality though, towns in the Old West were interesting places, where there were always two constants. Sand, and folks would probably end up in the ground, or that sand. So after the proper proceedings had taken place when someone croaked, it was time to dig a hole, or in these poor souls' cases, a lot of holes. Cholera outbreaks would keep a gravedigger busy for days. However, I thank the gravediggers for their service. I mean, someone had to do it. People like to give them a bad rap because they spend all their time with cadavers. That doesn't mean they're weird social outcasts. Well, except for Dompe and Seth from Red Dead Redemption, and well, the ones from Hamlet. Those guys are pretty weird, actually. Oh boy, maybe we should just keep our distance from them. I don't know, I'm getting out of here.
Number 8, Saloon owner. Saloons are about as synonymous with the Old West as a single tumbleweed blowing in the wind, moving from stage left to stage right. Just about anyone could be a saloon owner too, from Festus down the street to the previous sheriff to a fancy gambler. The saloons of the Old West outnumbered churches 100 to 1, and are any of us really surprised? You'd see one general store, one doctor, if you're lucky, and then like 3 saloons all on the same street. It's actually probably one of the most usual jobs on this list. It was also one of the most accessible jobs, usually being what people turned to when other avenues of employment ran dry. It would even be what you did while saving up money to buy farmland or to run for your office in your government. And in a town where everyone and their moms knows you as the guy who serves the liquor, you ain't gonna have a hard time getting elected. I kinda wanna be a barkeep now.
Number 7, Lady of the Evening. I talk about these ladies a lot, I know. Not because I want to, but because that's history, baby. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm window shopping only these days anyways. That's just the way she goes. A wise man once said, sometimes she goes, sometimes she doesn't. Way she goes, boys. When we think back and look at the Old West, you think of all the hard-working men and women who made the frontier possible. If it wasn't for those pioneers, we might not have the West Coast today. That means no vegan food. Ooh. That being said, the brothels and ladies who laid down their lives are a huge part of that history. Some brothels became so wealthy that they even would invest back in their towns, buying schools, medical buildings, that kind of thing. The truth of the matter is, no matter how greasy it might seem, it just wouldn't be the Wild Wild West with a little girl power.
Number 6, a banker. Look, it ain't really unusual, but you get shot at a lot. Bank robberies were not just in movies, no sir. To be a banker these days came with the territory of inviting unwelcome weapon-wielding bandits to hold you up. Apart from robberies, these banks had pretty much zero regulation too, so fraud and mismanagement was pretty commonplace. It's almost safer to keep your savings in a vault at home. Almost. A lot of the time, these banks were just a couple of fellers in town who teamed up, pulled their money together, and opened a community bank. You can kinda guess how this probably wouldn't be the most trustworthy of monetary depositories. But they were absolutely essential for some people, especially those in the cattle business, where you would see around $50,000 to $100,000 exchange hands in some of those transactions. That's a lot of money back then. Heck, that's a lot of money right now. To me, at least. Applications for a sugar mama will be received in the comments below.
Number 5, gambler. You gotta know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, and know when to walk away. Anyone who spends time in front of a slot machine will tell you that it can be a dangerous game. Many have claimed to won it big, all whilst envelopes with red print pile up at the front door. Final notice? Pfft, that means another spin, baby. Well, this is a similar story of the Old West, but instead of a one-armed bandit, there were actual bandits with 2 arms and guns. Yikes. It's a game of poker, lies, bluffs. Playing the wrong hand could wind up turning sour. The gamblers are the type of guys who roll into town in the shiniest clothes and stay in the best places. And right before you notice you've been cheated at the poker table, he's already cashed out.
Number 4, Milliner. Hey, I have a proposition. So we have hats for men, right? Now, what if we employ someone for the sole purpose of, get this, making hats for women? Well, Jebediah, we have that. That would be the milliner down the road there. If you were a high fashion lady in the 19th century, then you would have definitely come into contact with these fine sellers and makers of women's hats. They were usually located in bigger cities where the higher end families would either live or spend their time. And you should take a look at some of these hats. They are works of art. Maybe some are a little whack, but hey.
Number 3, Conman. You'll like this one, guys. You're gonna like this one. There's nothing more peculiar, more strange, more theatrical than a snake oil salesman. Where would John Marston be without Nigel West Dickens? I don't know. They were traveling salesmen who were swindlers, liars, crooks, thieves, selling pseudoscience products to folks who just didn't know any better. It would work something like this. I would show up in town with my traveling cart of wares and mysteries. There, standing on a small crate, like the one I'm standing on right now, I would give the town my best sales pitch. Introducing Dr. Andrew's new and improved Life Vigor supplements. Here before you find folks is a tall bottle of rejuvenation, made from the finest ingredients across the globe. Ginger, ginseng, milkweed, red sage, English mace, golden currant. And as if that weren't enough, Dr. Andrew's new and improved Vigor supplement has the minerals and vitamins that carry you through a long day's work in the fields. Vitamin A through K, copper, iron, potassium. This bottle here is not to only put a pep in your step and refill your stamina, but also cures what ails you. A proven cure for fever, chills, indigestion, cholera, yellow fever, dysentery, and even known to help heal broken bones. Modern science has brought this gift to you today, ladies and gentlemen. And all you have to do now is say yes. Say yes to rejuvenation and yes to Dr. Andrew's new improved Vigor supplement. I think you guys get the point. $49.99.
Number 2, a photographer. Want to never smile for eternity? Get your picture taken in the Old West. During the 1860s and 70s, the frontier was a wondrous, exotic place, which made it an excellent place to be a photographer. Sure, you had people who could draw and paint the landscapes and the people of the place, but people were distrusting of artists' interpretations. Pictures sold you the place exactly as it was. The high-quality images were in high demand. Every government survey and all the major railroads had official photographers. Photographs made for excellent evidence of plots of land, mines, and other structures for investors. But that's boring. More excitingly, common people with a bit of money would often go and get really not grim, not boring pictures taken like this.
Number 1, Gunslinger. I bet you when someone says Wild Wild West, the first thing you think of is a gunslinger. A cowboy riding his horse into the sunset, with his cowboy hat and big iron on his hip. Every step into the saloon is echoed with the jingle jangle of spurs on the heels of his leather boots. No, this isn't a country singer concert. This is the Old West, the life of a lonesome gunslinger and outlaw, riding town to town, either getting away from trouble or looking for it, really. The same kind of folks who got their name up on a wanted poster. Just be sure Sheriff Stringbean ain't around to look for you, that's all I can say. Also, fun fact, bounty hunting is still allowed in the US today. That's crazy, who would've thought?
Kicking off the list at number 10, going the distance. First things first, how much was an IPA back in the 1800s? That's why we clicked this video, right? That's all we want to know. Some beers today cost like $13 at the bar. What's going on? Nowadays we have happy hour, drink specials, wine pairing suggestions that go along with your meal. We have affordable alternatives today at the bar. Back in the 1850s, saloons would price their drinks depending on how far away you had to travel to get there. Isn't that wild? In the Yukon, their shots of whiskey were like 50 cents a pop. That was a lot of money back in the day. If you were to ask for the same drink in a local saloon, say in Colorado, you could get numerous beverages for the same price. And as you would expect, the fancier the establishment, the more you'll spend. But either way, it's not going to be comfortable.
Number 9. Manure everywhere. The 1800s were changing times, especially on the western frontier. Cities were being built, America was under reconstruction, and if you see my video on the 1800s technology, then you know how things were about to get a little wild. Except something I want to talk about today is, well, it's gonna drive moms and wives nuts across the country. How many times have you told your husband or the kids to wipe off their feet before coming into the house? Or stop wearing their shoes in the house? Right? It's the worst. I'm sorry, Mom. Okay, but imagine that, except everyone is bringing in their muddy, bloody, and manure-covered boots into the house. Horses and livestock were just a part of everyday life. That means droppings, or road apples, as they're so commonly called. The smell alone on a hot summer day could make any cowboy turn green. I think I'm going to puke, Dad.
Number 8. No stools. Okay, this one's for all the bartenders out there. I see you. I respect you. Bar seating is vital. You get your regulars coming in. Joan with a limp, she's so nice. She's always so nice every day. Always gets a grilled cheese. She's the best. Always a smile on her face. Individuals who want to grab a bite and read the paper, obviously they don't need to take up an entire table for 8, so you have spots at the bar. It's ideal. We're used to this. But back in the Western days, bar stools just weren't a thing. Bar spots it didn't exist. You couldn't sit and vent to your local barkeep about why your ex hasn't texted you back. They didn't have stools at the bar, they just had the rail at the bottom for your foot. Just that little bar rail there for the little lean right there. A nice cowboy lean. Yeah, I'll just eat fish and chips, standing up leaning. Awesome. Just the thing you want after walking in the sun all day long. A foot rail.
Number 7. Duels at high noon. Let me paint a picture for you, partner. It's a warm summer night, and you find yourself sitting at a card table in a saloon that's named after a barnyard animal. The piano is blasting a ragtime tune as waiters bustle about, serving drinks to unruly cowboys that fill the establishment. In front of you are 3 unsavory characters, each more than the next. As the night goes on, so do the poker chips. And when one gentleman ain't taking kindly to his losses, some insults about each other's mothers are exchanged. A powerful slap reaches the man across the poker table, matching the energy of Will Smith on an Oscar night. Too soon? I don't know.
Wow, wow, West.
Wow, West. That's when it's settled. Tomorrow at high noon, they're gonna settle this like gentlemen. A duel at noon with guns. That's how they did it. Does it get any more classic than that? I don't think so, folks. The clock strikes noon, and only one outlaw remains, and he's married to Jada Smith.
Number 6. Only talking. Ugh, here we go. You ever go to a bar, you're having a nice time, you and your pals order some Caesar salads for the table, the night is now well on its way, we're feeling good. Then 10 o'clock hits and you see a band start to set up. Okay, game time decision. Do we settle up and leave before they start? Or do we give them a chance, end up feeling bad, and feel obligated to stay until the very end at 3 a.m.? It's tough. Usually the latter ends up happening. Back in the 1800s, we didn't have to worry about such an issue. Most of the time, these saloons were just for business. The odd time you would have poker, dice, a piano perhaps would be in the room with some jazzy fingers making an appearance. But when saloons first popped up in Wyoming back in 1822, most of the time it was for lawmen, miners, gamblers, just pure business. Not many blind dates happening in booth 16, you know what I mean?
Number 5, comfort of the ladies of the evening. Now being that it's the Old West and there was just a shootout in the street, folks need to take their minds off of such horrors. Add into the mix long hard days tending fields and livestock, people need to take off some steam. The local saloon is there for that. However, like a hidden menu at McDonald's, there's some other activities a man can engage in that aren't perhaps a regular service. Aw, who the hell am I kidding? Ladies of the evening were quite common back then, actually. Naturally, it was a very dangerous job. However, if anything good can come from that, it's that in some cases these women became very wealthy enough to become the madam of their own establishments. And in some other cases, these madams were using their wealth to invest back into their towns, like building schools, doctor's offices. Imagine getting treatment from something and the doctor says, "These bandages were brought to you by Madame Dover's Wicked Wizard Vacuum Double Sloshy Slush 9000. It's a great product, what can you say?
Number 4, interior decor. We've seen a Western saloon in movies. More often than not, it's the swinging door. You know, the classic, they always kick it in, boom, and dust everywhere and all over the place. Dust gets all on people's meals, the classic. You sort of need to kick those doors open, kind of, also. Because if you go through slow, it's just weird. It like pushes your clothes back. You need that cowboy momentum. In reality, there weren't a lot of swinging saloon doors. In fact, most saloons across the West were in pretty rough shape. They didn't look like a Tarantino set at all. They looked like that one pub in that one town that one time, you know? Just not clean, not clean at all. You ride by, you're like, is that still open? How is that still open? These saloons were tiny rooms. We had stools or chairs made of fur. You know, no one's running fish tacos to tables in the 1850s. It doesn't always smell like a nice pub. You don't see something go by and you go, ooh, what's that? I wanna have that. No, that doesn't happen here. One of the fanciest saloons has to be the White Elephant in Fort Worth, Texas. It was 2 stories and it served fresh fish and oysters. Apparently it was a lovely time.
Number 3, Manifest Destiny. The destiny of America. There's a famous poster somewhere. It's like an angel guiding the pioneers west. It's like pointing, doing something like that. Back to the history. What is Manifest Destiny? Well, for our non-American audience, it was this very core belief that since America had won its independence and begun expanding west, that they were destined to do so and keep expanding. And expanding. Why should the freedom train stop here, right? Coast to coast, baby. And maybe buy Alaska from Russia, since, well, they're not really using it. Okay, and maybe Hawaii. They got pineapples or something, I don't know. Alright, maybe even heavily influenced places that are beyond US borders. But all that American influence and imperialism starts here. Imagine being the pioneer who dared to venture west, like the Great Oregon Trail, or those who crossed the desert states. And some really religious folks that found a salty lake in the desert looked at their wives and said, I need at least 2 or 3 more. God bless America.
Number 2, Mixologist. You ever go to a pub, like a chill pub, dare I say a restaurant, and a dude with a mustache thinks he's in Peaky Blinders for no reason behind the bar? He's flipping bottles that don't need to be flipped, he's lighting shots on fire. Guy, it's 12:45 in the afternoon. What's your soup of the day? Where did this come from, historically? Where did the cool bartender role come from? I'm trying to order a Cosmo, but he won't stop doing stunts. In the 1800s, bartenders were referred to as mixologists. They were top dog. They had to be. They were the fanciest guys in town. We're now doing impressions of these guys today, you know, with the bow tie, and we pour it in fancy ways, because around the late 1800s, saloon owners were growing rapidly. So now you needed to have something special, something unique for the town, like say a witty mixologist who can twirl his mustache as he pours a drink without looking. Great, now the town feels special, it feels unique. Manuals for bartenders came out around the 1860s, that's when things started to get more serious. A gentleman named Jerry Thomas published a guide called How to Mix All Kinds of Plain and Fancy Drinks. Today we still have that, but now it's a red sticky binder that says meal specs and Sharpie. It's not as fancy, but it gets the job done.
Number 1, dysentery. Nothing is more horrible, more awful than catching dysentery. Trust me, I would know. I never caught it, sometimes I get diarrhea. Anyway, in Oregon Trail, the very charming DOS game. Gotta love that DOS color palette. Eye melting cyan and violet. Nice. This text-based adventure game, however, is grounded in some truth, as we can all imagine this wasn't a time of great cleanliness. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, malaria, or more commonly known as yellow fever, and even scurvy, which you usually associate that with pirates, but Cowboys got it too. Which, given the conditions of the Old West, makes for a not so fruit-friendly environment. So yeah, it does make sense. Sadly for Cowboys, prospectors, and everyone in between, there was a good chance you would lay down with a headache, and then the rest of your posse would have to lay you down forever in the ground, partner.
Number 10, diseases. Dude, I had a toothache the other day, swelled up immediately. I would never have lasted in this era. Unfortunately, everyone, it wasn't called the mild West. And when people were sick, they got sick, like sick. For instance, cholera, shared along the Mormon and Oregon trails, killed loosely 6,000 to 12,000 people on their way to the California gold rush between 1849 and 1855. It's believed that more than 150,000 Americans died during the 2 pandemics from 1832 to 1849. Yo, that is terrifying. So not only do you have to dodge bears and root canals, just washing your face in the local popular stream could get you, huh? The Great Plains smallpox pandemic killed more than 17,000 Native Americans within its first few months of being there. The American Fur Company steamboat pulled up and got off, coughed a bunch of times, and then people just unfortunately started dropping. There was never an official death record, as smallpox decimated the Americas when it arrived, both way back from the Spanish and then again from up north with the fur trade. Sneezing, coughing, everywhere, just cover your mouth, guys, you know?
Number 9, kicked by a horse. Yeah, we've heard about this at some point in history, but did it actually happen? Like, how often was somebody just poof, and then that's it? Turns out getting kicked in the head by a horse back in the 1800s was like getting in a car accident. It happened pretty often, my friends. Yeah, it's pretty sad. Bill Pickett, just sounds like a Western man right off the hop. Bill Pickett was born in the late 1870s. He invented something called the bulldogging practice, which is to jump from the back of a horse onto a wild steer. Yeah, like you're Woody from Toy Story, just doing a heist, just jumping from one thing and leaping to the other. Crazy. While your hat's still on your head, somehow, no idea. And there's many that attempted this and ultimately failed. Yeah, you can't wrestle a wild animal and then live to tell about it often. I've read it. Yellowstone National Park is apparently a hotspot. This guy sends me a link the other day. Yellowstone National Park, man gored in front of family. I'm like, okay. But even Bill Pickett himself got trampled and stomped to death in 1932. Holbrook Lynn, a Broadway star from the late 1800s, also met their fate from a horse accident. Malcolm Baldrige Jr., an American politician from the late 80s, rodeo accident. Yeah, brutal way to go.
Number 8, wildlife. The Wild West was a pretty harsh time. If you were lucky enough to enjoy some peace and quiet away from the saloons and bathhouses and spend some time outdoors with the family, well, then you had to be pretty careful. I mean, I guess most of the time people were outside, you know, fresh air, birds chirping, and of course an array of vicious and deadly predators, overpopulated and hungry. Dude, the grizzlies are named after the grizzlies, right? Like, imagine all those horses you had to wrangle, or the gators of the south just waiting for you to take a leak, or pecked to death by these huge birds of prey. If you didn't have a rifle on you, something could get you. And that's all during the day. At night, laying on the ground on like a rolled up t-shirt, scorpions and coyotes? What were the bugs like? No muscle back then, just waking up stung to absolute by everything with legs? Don't even get me started on the snakes. Living in your boots or hat? I'm a pretty outdoorsy guy, but god damn.
Number 7, the gallows. We've mentioned the gallows many of times here on Bumblebee. It's almost like humans are consistently cruel throughout history or something like that. Odd. When it comes to meeting your fate in the Wild West, it sounds horrible to say, but with the rest of this list coming up, at least being hanged was fast. You know what I mean? And in the case of Tom Blackjack Ketchum, it was historical in a historically awful way. After a train robbery gone awry, or as I've said for 10 years, Ori, Tom Ketchum was held in prison until his date with the gallows arrived. But while waiting in prison, this man gained weight. The guy was eating good. He weighed around 200 pounds by the time of his demise. And dark detail here, but his body was so heavy when he was hanged that his head just kinda, you know, I don't want to say anything here on YouTube, but like his head, that's all I'll say, just.
Number 6, topicals. If we know anything about doctors from history, is that sometimes they didn't get it right. Most of the time, super helpful, and then like sometimes, yeah, I have a cough, here's some ammonia. Come on, you can trust me. Just call me Doc. You know what I mean? Doctors in the mid 1800s, wild west times were just like jarring and bottling everything up. Everything had a remedy. There were coaches that would just sell topicals and ailments. Hair loss? Here you go. Sore legs? Here you go. Tuberculosis? Ooh, yeah, sorry son, that's gonna kill you. We don't have a cream for that one. And tons of painkillers, of course, like opiates, morphine. Everyone's running around jonesing with cold sweats. Basically, you could just pull up to a remedies wagon and ask for either cocaine syrup or cannabis fluid or opium needles and be on your way. Every elixir, cure, and potion. This time literally went from medieval root canals to widespread vaccines in like 60 years. Pain leaves for headaches? Ooh, I'll take that one, please.
Number 5, weather. Weather, you want to believe it or not.
Try again.
Back in the 1800s, obviously weather was a major factor, as it is today. Hailstorms, lightning, high winds. When you're a cowboy, this all sucks even more, honestly. Especially the opposite, when it's dry and humid for weeks at a time. Check this out. Wooden wagon wheels would actually shrink because of the heat. So they had to be soaked overnight just to prevent the iron rims from falling off during your commute during day hours. Yeah, it was so dry the wagon wheels needed water. Yeah, sorry I'm late, my wagon wheels were a little thirsty. Yeah, I had to wait for them to soak up some fun. I can't even drive a car downtown without having a panic attack today. let alone rubbing axle grease on my dry lips, waiting for my wheel to drink water.
Number 4, gangs. If you've played the Red Dead Redemption series, then you've probably held up a train or two. Some of the posses that were famous at the time actually did that though, and weren't so nice about it. The American West was made up of criminal outfits, usually a gang or a posse, involving members who would just live and ride and rob together with. Jobs were scarce, and it seemed that it was just a little easier to just demand what you want and then enjoy the birth of all the media attention after, making some, quote, famous. An obsession, the cowboy culture, the outlaw criminal. Some of them include Billy the Kid's gang, the High Fives gang, and the Oklahombres. That's a good one. Artists were getting better at the time, and people were sketching wanted lists for local sheriffs. These posters would be calling cards for these guys. They kept them, put them in their pockets as souvenirs. Charles E. Bowles, also known as Black Bart, held up a total of 28 stagecoaches without ever being caught, and even had the reputation of being a gentleman about it too, emptying strong boxes but never actually shaking down the passengers. There were even reports that he would even leave verses of poetry behind. Guy's a smooth criminal, huh?
Number 3, the night after. I'm sure the Wild Wild West was wildly lonely. Definitely, this isn't news. Like Kyle said, we've played Red Dead Redemption, just wandering around alone. Sometimes you need more than a train heist, right? Sometimes you need love. Even if you have to pay for it with railroad bonds or whatever. Saloons have all the things a lone traveler could want, including STIs. Great, how much is, great, debit. We'll just pay for all this in one swift tap, I guess. The famous Wild Bill Hickok, okay? He had a rough go. Guy had some troubles after a few saloons, okay? He was dipping around in a few bars and yeah. Alexander Fleming wasn't born until 5 years later in 1881, so penicillin wasn't around to save any cowboys at this time.
Number 2, battles. The archetype of the Old West period is generally accepted by historians to have occurred between the end of the American Civil War in 1865 till about 1890. The American frontier, also known as the Wild West, is the geography, history, folklore, and culture associated with the American expansion mainland that settlers started in the 17th century and ended in 1912. This era, giving rise to the expansionist attitude known as manifest destiny, which was the belief that Americans were supposed to travel and expand west. But with that came a lot of conflict. You can't just waltz in and throw up a house when someone else lives there already, you know? Years of warring tribes and bands, colonist battles, ego-filled duels, and the aggressive pillaging of land stolen took countless number of lives. Yeah, countless, like we'll never actually know the accurate number. Roughly 750,000 lives were lost in the Civil War. Yeah, nasty stuff.
And finally, number 1, Helena Duels. Beginning, of course, in Helena, Texas, Helena Duels were violent, awful. This activity came from what was then the toughest town on earth. And again, this is back in the late 1800s, so what that even means, I can't even compare. The Helena Duel began here. There's even a movie called The Duel with Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. It's not a great movie, but it's a history lesson in itself. A Helena Duel puts our opponents' left hands tied together, right? They're just tied together with buckskin or something that smells awful, and you have to just fight each other using one arm. Now, of course, in Western fashion, there was a weapon or two involved that I don't want to get too deep into on YouTube, so it got pretty gory, it got pretty violent. The only rule here was that they can't bleed too much. Awesome, that's a great fun rule, like whipping that one out on Saturdays. Hey, no one bleed too much or else, you know, then we gotta stop. I thought UFC was brutal, let alone a Helena Duel starring Liam Hemsworth, of all people. Really?